Strange coincidences, a recent meeting, and some outlandish claims. Here's why Glen Edward Rogers confessed to the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. In the early morning hours of June 13, 1994, the bodies of 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend, 25-year-old Ronald Goldman, were found lying in pools of blood outside Simpson's Brentwood, California condominium. As reported by Penn Live, both Simpson and Goldman had been stabbed multiple times, and their attacker had fled the scene. In the course of their investigation, authorities learned Nicole was the ex-wife of former football star O.J. Simpson. Per AP News, law enforcement officials went to O.J.'s house at approximately 4:30 a.m. to inform him of Nicole's death. They immediately noticed what appeared to be a bloodstain on O.J.'s Ford Bronco, as well as a trail of what appeared to be blood leading from the vehicle to the front door of his home. As they were suspicious of O.J.'s possible involvement in the murders, authorities obtained a search warrant to search the inside of his vehicle and home.
I always said it was the most depressing and sad night of my life.
During the search, law enforcement officials found a bloody glove, which was similar in appearance to a glove found at the murder scene per AP News. They also found more bloodstains inside Simpson's vehicle and home. Simpson was ultimately arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder with special circumstances on June 17, 1994. However, he vehemently denied any involvement. During the trial, prosecutors argued that O.J. and Nicole had a notoriously volatile relationship and that O.J. was jealous of Nicole's relationship with Goldman. Meanwhile, O.J.'s defense team argued that he was framed by police officers who had a history of racist behavior. They also argued that the evidence against O.J. simply did not prove he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial, which lasted 9 months, concluded on October 3, 1995. Jurors determined O.J. Simpson was not guilty in the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman per Newsweek. Although Simpson and his supporters think the jury made the correct decision, others believe the former football star got away with murder. Over the years, several theories regarding who else might have killed Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman have been suggested. One theory, which was presented in the 2012 documentary My Brother the Serial Killer, suggested that the pair were actually murdered by serial killer Glen Edward Rogers. In the documentary, Glen's brother Clay Rogers said, "I'm absolutely certain that my brother killed Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman." Clay also suggested that Glen had the means and opportunity to kill Nicole and Goldman, as he was working as a house painter in the area when they were murdered. Per ABC News, Glen reportedly told his brother and sister that he met Nicole and noted that she was wealthy.
"They got money, they're well off, and I'm taking her down."
In an interview with a criminal profiler, Glen allegedly claimed that O.J. Simpson had hired him to steal a pair of earrings and kill his former wife during the robbery. Glen also provided specific details about the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, which further supported his claim that he committed the brutal murders. ABC News reported that in addition to knowing details about the murders, Rogers was able to draw a detailed picture of the knife he claims to have used to kill the victims. According to ABC News, filmmaker David Monahan said he believes the information provided by Glen's brother. Combined with Glen's confession to the criminal profiler, Monahan believes that this should have been enough to prompt an official investigation into his possible involvement in the murders. However, Ronald Goldman's father, Fred Goldman, disagrees. When asked about the information presented in the documentary film, Fred said per ABC News, "The fact of the acquittal at the hands of the jury will never wash away this murder from the hands of O.J. Simpson, no matter how many Glen Rogers pop up on the media radar screen." Glen Edward Rogers was ultimately arrested 6 weeks after Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found murdered. Law enforcement officials said he went on a crime spree and is suspected of more than 70 murders throughout the United States, per ABC News. Rogers was convicted of several murders and subsequently sentenced to death in both California and Florida. However, he was never arrested and indicted in Brown Simpson's and Goldman's deaths, nor was he mentioned as a person of interest in those crimes.
O.J. Simpson's murder trial dominated headlines for months, but who was Nicole Brown Simpson, the woman O.J. was accused of killing? There's nothing quite like the love of a dog, and on that June night in 1994, it was the melancholy howling of Nicole Brown Simpson's dog that first alerted neighbors to the fact that something terribly wrong had happened. Neighbors all heard the dog, reported the Associated Press. Stephen Schwab took a break to walk his own dog when he came across the white Akita and saw that the dog was splattered with blood. Schwab's neighbor, also summoned by the dog's wails, decided to take the dog and walk it back in the direction it had come from. The dog ran up the path to a condo where the bloodied body of Nicole Brown Simpson lay. Later, the Los Angeles Times reported that the dog's actions allowed authorities to pinpoint the time of the murders. The Washington Post reported that the courtroom was uncomfortable on the day that they were shown photos of the crime scene. and read descriptions from the coroner's findings. Highlighting the brutality of the killings was necessary to establish the idea that the murders had been committed in a fit of jealous rage. Los Angeles County Coroner Lakshman Satyavagiswaran testified that Nicole Brown Simpson had been lying on the ground, unable to fight back against an attacker that stood over her, as her throat was cut with such force that the knife sliced into her spine. The New York Times reported that prosecutors were also able to make strong cases for a few other things based on the state of the bodies. Although Nicole was covered in blood, her feet were clean, which led police to conclude that she had been killed first and that she had been restrained as it happened. Law enforcement testified that Ron Goldman, on the other hand, fought back. Marks in the dirt around his body and the fact that his shirt was pulled up seemed to indicate that a struggle took place immediately after Nicole was killed. Nicole was stabbed a total of 12 times, while Goldman was stabbed 25 times.
Mr. Simpson is a fugitive of justice right now.
According to the Associated Press's timeline of Nicole Brown Simpson's murder and the following court case, the night started with her daughter's dance recital. Her children, Sydney and Justin, were just 8 and 5 years old when she was killed at their home. Had their dog not alerted neighbors and dragged them to the crime scene, it's entirely possible they would have discovered the bodies of their mother and Goldman. Penn Live says that when law enforcement first responded to the call from neighbors, they found a tranquil scene inside the home. She had drawn a bath and made a bowl of ice cream, and the television was on. Her children were sound asleep in their respective bedrooms, unaware of what had happened just outside their doorstep. Nicole's family has spoken about the struggle to protect the children from the media circus that followed, and their attempts at helping them live as normal a life as possible. Regardless of whether one thinks O.J. Simpson was guilty or innocent, there's no denying that Nicole Brown Simpson's murder brought a chilling history to light. During O.J.'s trial, prosecutors pointed to an incident that happened on January 1, 1989. When police arrived at the Simpson home, Nicole had injuries so extensive that she was taken to the hospital for treatment. The official police report quoted her as saying, "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me." According to the New York Times, it was the 9th time officers had responded to domestic violence-related calls at the home. 4 months after the call, O.J. was sentenced to 2 years probation, 120 hours of community service, a $200 fine, and a court-ordered $500 donation to a women's shelter. Officers recounted Nicole as saying, "You never do anything about him. You talk to him and then you leave. I want him arrested. I want him out so I can get my kids." When questions were raised about whether or not O.J. had gotten preferential treatment because of his fame, Lucy Friedman of New York City's Victim Services said that jail sentences for domestic battery were rare, saying, "It's still not considered as serious a crime as battering on the street."
Finally, in 1992, Nicole woke up to the reality of her situation.
Nicole Brown Simpson's death came about 2 years after she left and divorced O.J. Simpson. They had been married for about 7 years, and in the middle of their time together, O.J. had been charged with spousal battery. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, their relationship had started with often overlooked warning signs. That, they say, included a courtship that progressed very, very quickly, in which Nicole was showered with gifts that O.J. often talked about. The hotline says that a new partner might be more willing to accept or overlook hints of abusive behavior if they're also being treated as if they are being put on a pedestal. There were also reports of intimidation, and the hotline cites one incident where police were called after O.J. smashed her car's windshield with a baseball bat. In the Fox television special, O.J. Simpson, The Lost Confession, domestic violence commentator Rita Smith points out, subtle and not-so-subtle forms of violence are used to continue to keep control over their victim. So him just bouncing the bat off the tire initially was a subtle message.
I am in charge. I will determine the framework for this relationship.
O.J. recalled the incident and indicated that there was nothing wrong with what happened, saying, "I mean, it's my car. I paid for it," I said. "I pay for everything around here." During O.J. Simpson's trial for Simpson's murder, prosecutors decided that they needed to establish a motive. When they started interviewing those who knew Nicole, they uncovered what they presented as a pattern of stalking and harassment in the months and years leading up to her death. One of the most intriguing testimonies came from Keith Zlomzowicz, a name that might not be instantly recognizable, but that is forever tied to the tragic events of that 1994 night. Zlomzowicz was, in addition to having dated Nicole, the owner of the restaurant that Nicole had eaten dinner at on the night of her death, and the employer of Ron Goldman. Zlomsowicz testified to a series of incidents where he said OJ had spied on them, kicked the door of her house in, and issued some pretty serious threats. It was also Zlomsowicz who asked Goldman to drop off a pair of sunglasses that Nicole had left behind. Los Angeles police officer Ron Scheck was in a bit of a unique position. Not only was he a friend of the Simpsons, but he was also one of the responding officers to her phone calls to the police. He told Vanity Fair she had told him she was being stalked, and recalled, "The Jew speaking through a window? Come on, I didn't see that happening. I gave this guy so much leeway." Faye Resnick was most recently featured on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, but in the early 1990s, she was a friend of both Nicole Brown Simpson and O.J. Simpson. Just a few months after Nicole's murder, the release of her book, Nicole Brown Simpson, The Private Diary of a Life Interrupted, brought the trial to a halt as it was debated whether or not the contents would have an influence. Still, Vulture says that the book, described as tawdry and tragic, reads in part as troublingly honest. That's particularly evident in places where Resnick not only accuses OJ of some manipulative behavior, but seems to reveal some of her own, including an incident where she asks Nicole not to leave OJ until after a party she was planning.
He's just saying anything he can without proof, without evidence.
According to the Associated Press, Resnick said that she had called Nicole just a few hours before her death. She also said that a few days prior, she had told Nicole that she was afraid that she was going to die. She recalled telling her, "Please, let's just get out of here. Let's go to Europe." Nicole told her in response that the drugs she was taking were making her paranoid. Needless to say, Nicole didn't go to Europe, and on the night she was murdered, Resnick was in an addiction treatment facility. The year 2020 was the 25th anniversary of the verdict in O.J. Simpson's criminal trial. On that occasion, Investigation Discovery aired O.J. and Nicole, An American Tragedy, with one of the major reveals of the show being Nicole's diaries. Her sister, Tanya Brown, was quoted as saying, "Maybe she knew this was her destiny, and maybe subconsciously she knew something was going to happen. Maybe that's why she kept real detailed diary entries." The diaries, it was revealed, were discovered in a safe deposit box along with photos of her injuries. The first entry went all the way back to 1978, and she wrote, "First time he beat me up, threw me on the floor, hit me, kicked me. We went to the hotel where he continued to beat me for hours and I continued crawling for the door." She also wrote about other incidents that sent her to the hospital, and she detailed pretending that she was in an accident of one sort or another. In another entry, she wrote that he had pulled a gun on her and demanded she have an abortion. The diaries weren't allowed to be entered as evidence during the murder trial, as it was ruled they were hearsay and not admissible.
Subconsciously, she knew something was going to happen.
It's no secret that in many cases, the names of the victims get overlooked and buried behind the names of accused killers. And that, say some of Nicole Brown Simpson's closest friends and family, is the second part of the tragedy. As a friend told the Los Angeles Times, "I feel that Nicole has gotten lost in all this." Even as the criminal court case of O.J. Simpson dragged on, she was portrayed as a victim of domestic abuse and ultimately of murder. But those who knew her best argued that so much more was lost in the courtroom. They knew a Nicole who had spent all of her adult life in a celebrity relationship. The couple met when she was 18 years old. And they also knew that she had been determined to break away from that and forge her own path. They knew a Nicole who was, quote, bubbly, always happy and smiling, according to her former teacher, Bill Prestridge. They described a girl who was ready to get out of high school, who wanted to do big things, and for a time, all appearances seemed to be one of a happy and loving relationship. However, one friend was quoted as saying, "The truth is, no one really knew her during her marriage. She was never free to be herself or to have friends." While no killer ever served jail time for the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, something else did happen. It put domestic violence on the nation's radar as an issue that wasn't just something that lurked behind closed doors anymore. The statistics from a 2018 Violence Policy Center report were pretty staggering. It's estimated that 1 in 4 women will be victims of domestic violence. The numbers were just as shocking for men, with 1 in 9 also being victims. Nicole Brown Simpson's death, and ultimately her letters, diaries, and photographs opened up a conversation about domestic violence. In some cases, it was in the context of Nicole's death that people heard the term domestic violence for the first time. That's true for Katie Ray Jones, who went on to become the CEO of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. On the heels of the trial came the Violence Against Women Act, and Ray Jones described the case as, quote, exposure into this world of abuse, specifically physical abuse and emotional abuse, and that controlling behavior that we all started hearing about as the trial unfolded. If you or someone you know is dealing with domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also find more information, resources, and support at their website.
Decades after the verdict was reached, many still scratch their heads at how O.J. Simpson was found not guilty for the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. It was the trial watched around the world, and it didn't go especially smoothly. The murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman occurred sometime between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on June 12, 1994. However, shortly after 11 that night, O.J. Simpson got into a waiting limo, which took him to Los Angeles International Airport to board a flight to Chicago.
On Sunday night, O.J. Simpson was taking off in the red eye in first class. 20 minutes later, his ex-wife and a friend were found dead outside her home.
The bodies of his ex-wife and Goldman were discovered shortly after midnight, and by noon on June 13th, O.J. Simpson was back in Los Angeles, where he was questioned by police but not arrested. In fact, he wasn't arrested until 4 days later on June 17th, even though police had noted the presence of bloodstains on his white Ford Bronco and had discovered a glove on his property that seemed to match one found near the bodies. To an outside observer, it might seem ludicrous not to place O.J. under arrest. However, fame seems to extend to many unexpected corners of the human experience. As UCLA law professor Peter Aranella explained in an analysis of the case by PBS, his celebrity status explains why he wasn't arrested very early on in the case, when the average defendant, given the blood evidence, would have been arrested immediately. The detectives handled him not like a criminal suspect, but like a celebrity. In the early afternoon of June 17th, the police announced that O.J. Simpson was indeed a suspect in the murders and that they were actively seeking to bring him in. For a few tense hours, it actually appeared as though one of the most beloved figures in U.S. sports history might go on the lam from the authorities. However, at around 6 p.m. that evening, Simpson himself called 911 to report his whereabouts. As it turned out, he was in the backseat of his friend's white Ford Bronco, heading at a leisurely speed down the freeway, a gun to his head, and the owner of the vehicle, Al Cowlings, behind the wheel. For the rest of that evening, local and national news covered the unfolding drama as Simpson, threatening suicide, slowly made his way toward his Brentwood estate. The chase was watched by millions of people and surely raised questions about how, months later, Simpson could possibly plead not guilty to the crimes when his actions on that surreal day seemed to so clearly broadcast his guilt. Years after the fact, in an interview for Fox TV, Simpson explained himself by saying that he had watched all of the considerable public esteem he had amassed over the years suddenly disappear, and that when his ex-wife and her friend were killed, he felt as if he too had been killed.
Brian and Nicole were physically dead, and it's almost like they killed me. Who I was attacked and murdered also.
When the trial was initially set to take place in Santa Monica, where the crime was committed, it has long been thought that it was ultimately moved to downtown Los Angeles to avoid the appearance of bias, as Santa Monica is predominantly white. Indeed, Simpson ended up with a jury predominantly composed of 8 black jurors. However, William Hodgman, one of the lead prosecutors on the case, claims the notion that the prosecution was trying to avoid having their famous black client tried in front of a mostly white jury is a misconception. Speaking with PBS, Hodgman explained that, at the time, most major cases in the entirety of Los Angeles County were being tried downtown, and by filing charges against Simpson there rather than in Santa Monica, the prosecution was just trying to get on with the proceedings. He explained, "It was a practical awareness that the case was going to be tried here, so let's not beat around the bush. Let's get the case queued up and let's get it going." Prosecutors Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden ran point on the trial, and to attorneys monitoring the case, it quickly became apparent that they may not have had the most focused strategy. They opened not with the physical evidence against O.J. Simpson, but on Simpson's alleged history of domestic violence against his ex-wife. It was an opening volley that foreshadowed a troubling tendency by the prosecution to get lost on tangents, belabor relatively trivial points, and fail to clarify their most important ones, tendencies that Judge Lance Ito failed to rein in time and again. Unfortunately, as author and attorney Scott Turow pointed out during a conversation with PBS, the prosecution's seeming inability to focus caused the trial to drag on for over a year, making it the longest criminal trial in California history. Speaking on how it took prosecutors 6 months to make their case, Turow reflected, The jury is going to be left with either one of two impressions. Either your evidence is overwhelming, or you're laboring day by day to make it appear to be better than it is. And unfortunately, in this case, it was the latter impression that the jury got left with. Ordinarily, the testimony of the first cops to arrive on the scene of a murder would be invaluable, but the prosecutors in the O.J. Simpson trial made a grave error in relying on the testimony of Mark Fuhrman. Fuhrman was called to testify largely about the evidence collected at the scene. In fact, he was the one who found the bloody glove on Simpson's property. During his testimony for the prosecution, he performed well, but when he came under a blistering cross-examination by the legendary attorney F. Lee Bailey, things fell apart quickly. At one point, Bailey asked Fuhrman whether he had ever used the N-word, with Fuhrman replying that he had not. Unbeknownst to him, Simpson's defense had hours of interviews between Fuhrman and an aspiring screenwriter, during which Fuhrman spewed racial slurs, condoned excessive force in falsifying reports, and boasted that it would be no sweat for a cop to get away with murder. Fuhrman was now facing perjury charges, and suddenly the defense's assertion that he had planted the glove on Simpson's property didn't seem so far-fetched. When he was later recalled to the stand to testify about whether he had ever planted evidence, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in response to all queries. Speaking with PBS, prosecutor William Hogston acknowledged that his team knew Fuhrman was problematic, but inexplicably chose to take their chances. Even more inexplicable was the trial's single most dramatic moment. In a courtroom demonstration masterminded by prosecutor Christopher Darden, prosecutors pretty much bet the house on the bloody gloves found at the crime scene in O.J. Simpson's estate being the smoking gun. Following Mark Fuhrman's testimony regarding the gloves, the prosecutors asked Simpson to get up from the defense table and put them on. This decision would go down in legal history as perhaps the biggest mistake any prosecuting attorney has ever made. As Judge Lance Ito instructed Simpson to move toward the jury, Simpson visibly struggled with the gloves. Speaking with Law and Crime, Dan Abrams, a court TV reporter at the time, reflected on the demonstration, explaining how many were shocked by prosecutors' decision to have Simpson try them on. He explained, "We assumed if they were moving forward with it, they must know that it's going to fit. But the exasperation on the face of Chris Darden told us everything we needed to know. Disaster." To say that demonstration backfired would be an egregious understatement. Not only did the jury get a made-for-TV moment that further cast doubt on Fuhrman's testimony, but Simpson's team was handed a killer punchline for defense attorney Johnny Cochran's closing argument.
"If it doesn't fit, you must acquit."
To this day, it's not known whether Mark Fuhrman or any other investigators actually planted any of the evidence against O.J. Simpson. Given the seemingly open and shut nature of the case, it doesn't make much sense on the surface for them to have done so. Even so, a great deal of defense testimony was dedicated to poking holes in the physical evidence, such as a bloody sock that a defense expert testified was likely not being worn when it came into contact with blood. Furthermore, Fuhrman's choice to plead the Fifth when asked directly of evidence tampering certainly didn't aid the prosecution against the rumors. Speaking with PBS, Simpson defense attorney Sean Chapman-Hawley put forth a plausible hypothesis as to why prosecutors would want to plant evidence despite already believing he'd committed the crime. She explained, "I think they thought he was guilty and they were trying to make their case a little more airtight. What they weren't counting on is the just thoroughness of this defense team being able to find where they framed him and the mistakes that they made." Incredibly, the prosecution's failure to present compelling information to the jury extended beyond evidence. A pair of witnesses, both of whom were willing to testify, were passed over by prosecutor Marcia Clark. Neither Jill Shively, who nearly got into a car accident with Simpson as he was allegedly speeding away from the scene of the crime, and Skip Junis, who spotted Simpson at Los Angeles International Airport disposing of something he was carrying in one of his bags, got a chance to testify. In the case of Shively, Clark declined to have her testify after she appeared on the tabloid TV show Hard Copy, having sold her story for $5,000. She said that Simpson was screaming through the streets at a high rate of speed and blazed through a red light as she watched. In response, a livid Clark dropped plans to put her on the stand, feeling she had blown her own credibility with her actions. As for Junis, Inside Edition suggests the things Simpson threw out could have been essential pieces of evidence, and he would later tell the outlet that he had no earthly idea why he wasn't called to testify.
I said, I don't understand why you haven't called me to talk about this, because I thought this might be of interest.
For all of the tangents explored and ill-advised areas of inquiry with which O.J. Simpson's prosecutors became sidetracked, it's fair to say that perhaps their strongest card was one that went severely underplayed: the DNA evidence. Forensic scientist Gary Sims testified that the blood samples found in O.J. Simpson's Bronco were a match for O.J. Simpson, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ronald Goldman. Notably, Simpson and Goldman had never met before the night of Goldman's death, so this evidence would be pretty compelling. During her closing argument, Marcia Clark did mention the presence of Goldman's blood in the Bronco, but it came amid a storm of largely unrelated information that likely confused jurors more than aided her point. As Hodgman expressed in his chat with PBS, prosecution may have been overly confident in the jury being able to follow them, as they painstakingly painted a picture involving myriad evidence, both physical and circumstantial, over the course of the grueling trial. Indeed, during Christopher Darden's closing argument, he simply repeated many parts of the dizzying array of details Clark had already hammered the exhausted jurors with, failing to drive home her point about the crucial DNA evidence. Today, it's safe to say that most impartial observers believe that there is, at the very least, a fair chance that O.J. Simpson is guilty of the murders of his ex-wife and her friend. With this belief being so widespread, it's hard to understand how he was not found guilty. While the trial's outcome obviously hinged on a variety of factors, the legal experts who spoke with PBS for their analysis of the case seem to agree that, somewhat fittingly, a football analogy might best explain Simpson's acquittal. The determined, experienced defense came ready to play. The overconfident, inexperienced prosecution did not, and Simpson's dream team was essentially able to game a flawed system. One member of that team, though, doesn't see it that way. Alan Dershowitz, one of Simpson's attorneys, suggested during his sit-down with PBS that the Simpson case was one in which the system actually worked too well for the comfort of those watching the trial unfold on their TV screens. He observed, "The public much prefers the old system, in which the prosecution really doesn't have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution really doesn't have to abide by the Constitution. The prosecution really doesn't have to play fair with all the evidence." Evidently, O.J.'s innocence is not beyond the realm of possibility, and it's tough to say what any one of us would do if we suddenly found ourselves accused of a horrifying crime we did not commit. However, it's likely few of us would write a book about how we would have committed the crime for which we were falsely accused. Even so, this is exactly what Simpson did, and in 2007 he announced a book originally titled "If I Did It, This Is How It Happened." Simpson's Fox TV interview, recorded shortly before the book's planned release, featured his first-person account of just how it might have happened, though this hypothetical confession seemed at many points anything but hypothetical. The book's release was blocked, and in a stunning twist, a bankruptcy court awarded its copyright to the family of Ronald Goldman. They opted to publish the book under the title "If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer," with a preface by Goldman's sister Kim. Simpson's stated reason for writing the book was to provide financial security for his and Nicole's children, but now any proceeds will go to satisfy the Goldman civil judgment against him.
Would you believe that the killings of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman took only a few minutes? The murders were incredibly violent, bloody, and swift. Whoever killed O.J.'s ex-wife and Goldman seemed to go right for the kill, savaging the two in front of her Brentwood, California condominium on June 12, 1994, while her two children slept inside. A passerby found the bodies crumpled on the ground, Brown Simpson at the bottom of the courtyard stairs and Goldman close by near some foliage. The killings would turn into one of the most infamous crimes in modern U.S. history, with Nicole Brown Simpson's famous ex-husband, NFL star turned broadcaster and occasional actor O.J. Simpson, becoming the prime suspect in the killings. The couple met while Nicole was an 18-year-old waitress in 1977, and O.J. was still married to his first wife, whom he divorced in 1979. Nicole and O.J. married in 1985. The couple had 2 children together, but over the years, Nicole told friends and family he was abusive toward her. In 1989, O.J. was arrested for spousal battery, to which he pleaded no contest. According to Bustle, during the 1989 spousal abuse incident, Simpson kicked and hit Nicole, and when responding officers arrived, Nicole reportedly told them, quote, "He's going to kill me."
You never hurt your wife either, correct?
No, I hurt my wife, yes.
By 1992, the couple had divorced. O.J. Simpson was the only suspect ever really considered for the killings, according to what a lead investigator said during the so-called trial of the century, in which Simpson was acquitted of the double murders after nearly 9 months of testimony. Still, shortly after the killings, neighbors started sharing what they knew. One told the Los Angeles Times he'd seen O.J. Simpson there several times, but that's not unusual since the couple shared children. Another said he'd seen Nicole walking her dog sometimes and wondered if she was attacked during a dog walk. As he said, there was a dog walking unattended on a leash found the next morning. Though Simpson was later held liable for Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman's deaths in a civil trial, to this day, no other suspects have been named for the crime. There were no signs of robbery, burglary, or any known motives for the vicious killings. What was later learned in Brown Simpson's autopsy report is that the assailant stabbed the mother 4 times in the neck and cut her throat so deeply that the knife went into her cervical spine. The slice was 5.5 inches by 2.5 inches in length, cutting through the soft tissues of the neck and 1/4 inch deep into Brown Simpson's bone, sparing the spinal canal and spinal cord. her trial testimony, a medical examiner said that the stabs likely happened first, then as Brown Simpson lay on the ground, the killer lifted her head by the hair and did the cut that would end Nicole Simpson's life, according to the Chicago Tribune. The medical examiner's report showed that other than the stabs to her neck, there were 3 other stab wounds to Brown Simpson's scalp, as well as a blunt force injury to her head. There were only a few defensive wounds on Nicole Brown Simpson's hands, which the chief Los Angeles coroner later testified showed that the attack only lasted a few minutes, according to the Chicago Tribune. The coroner said in his testimony, "I would say she died within a few minutes, probably less. These kinds of altercations can take place pretty rapidly." According to the coroner, the knife used was most likely 6 inches long and single-edged, yet whoever wielded it did so with such furious intent that the killer nearly decapitated Nicole Brown Simpson. Beyond the tragedy of the brutal murder of the young, vibrant woman, and the fact that no one has ever been convicted of taking her life and the life of Ron Goldman on that California summer night, is that Brown Simpson's autopsy report shows that she was otherwise in great health and likely had a long life ahead of her.
Asking friends to lie, playing the victim, and some well-timed blackouts. O.J. Simpson's hypothetical confession featured some seriously chilling details. After being acquitted of the brutal murders of his ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend Ronald Goldman in the mid-90s, O.J. Simpson wrote a book about it. In 2006, Simpson released If I Did It, in which he presented a supposedly hypothetical account of how he could have committed the crime, which he still maintained he didn't do. He also conducted an interview with the book's publisher, Judith Regan, which was set to air on Fox News. After being shelved for over a decade, Fox decided to air the special in 2018, and it featured a slew of shocking revelations. For instance, during the interview, Regan asked Simpson about a 1984 incident with a baseball bat.
I don't know why this has become such a big deal.
Simpson explained that he'd pushed back the date of his wedding to Brown, claiming that this is something most men do. He revealed that during this discussion, he'd been sitting on the hood of Brown's car while holding a baseball bat between his legs. After bouncing the bat against a tire, it hit the rim of the car, which didn't go down well.
And she says, if you damage that, you're going to have to pay for it. And I go, well, if I pay for that, I guess I have to pay for this too. And I kind of hit the front of her car.
According to the Los Angeles Times, this account isn't quite right, however. At Simpson's trial, it was revealed he had actually smashed the windshield, and when the cops arrived, he simply told them it was his car and that there was no problem. This would become a disturbingly regular pattern. Later in the interview, O.J. Simpson went into detail about what happened on New Year's Eve 1989.
I always said it was the most depressing and sad night of my life.
That night, one of the couple's frequent arguments got out of control. According to Simpson, they were both pretty tipsy, and Nicole Brown had allegedly become fixated on a comment made earlier in the evening by Catherine Edwards, the then fiancée of fellow NFL running back Marcus Allen. The comment was apparently related to Edwards' implication that Simpson had allegedly bought her a pair of gold earrings, leading Brown to believe that her husband may have been cheating. Simpson alleged that after Brown began pushing him, he threw her out with little concern for her well-being. The altercation prompted the police to respond.
She got physical with me, and obviously I'm bigger. I got more physical with her.
According to the Los Angeles Times, the incident was much worse than Simpson's description. Brown, who reportedly appeared bloody and dazed, ran toward officers screaming that Simpson was going to kill her. In a police report, Simpson is quoted as having said, "The police have been out here 8 times before, and now you're going to arrest me for this?" In the Fox interview, Simpson denied that the police had responded to his home on as many as 8 occasions. Since the 1989 incident was somehow his first arrest, there is no public record to contradict him. The 1989 incident seemingly marked the beginning of the end for the couple, and they would divorce in 1992. O.J. Simpson, however, had some trouble letting go of the relationship. As reported by the Washington Post, Nicole Brown's friends and family claimed that he had stalked his wife and anyone she attempted to date throughout their divorce. Simpson even allegedly kept a notebook in which he tracked his ex-wife's daily routine. During his interview with Regan, Simpson admitted to one incident in which he supposedly ran into Brown and her then-boyfriend while they were out on the town. After the encounter, Simpson admitted that he went to Brown's house, where he saw the pair having an encounter through a window. He decided to hit the door, apparently only to alert his ex to the fact that she could be seen from outside.
I just hit the door twice and left.
Simpson said he realized in that moment that his relationship with Brown was truly over. However, Brown's boyfriend at the time remembers the incident a bit differently. Speaking with Dayton Daily News in 2017, he alleged that Simpson kicked the door in and threatened them before leaving. Since the police were not called, there is no public record of this having happened. According to O.J. Simpson, in his jaw-dropping Fox interview, he would often attend family outings with Nicole Brown and their children, and occasionally they would get together alone. During one such dinner, Brown allegedly made the shocking confession that she had slept with Simpson's friend Marcus Allen at some point after their divorce. Simpson also claimed that Allen had admitted to the fling and that all of Nicole's close friends were aware of it.
I thought it was wrong because she had always been, really, honestly, she had always been the moral compass of our group of friends.
However, Allen flatly denied this claim at Simpson's civil trial. In a deposition, Allen also claimed that during Simpson's criminal trial, the former NFL star called him from jail and asked him to admit to the affair. Per CNN, Allen alleged that Simpson asked him to lie in order to paint a picture of Brown as an adulterer. Instead of agreeing, Allen ended the friendship. Perhaps the most troublesome domestic incident of all happened less than a year prior to the murders. During the Fox interview, Simpson described his reaction to the rumor he'd heard that Brown was having drug-filled sex parties at her house while his children were present. As the football player explained, he decided to show up at her house unannounced and read her the riot act. Brown called 911, and the recording of the call was a key piece of evidence at his trial. In the transcript of the call, Brown said that Simpson broke down the back door to gain access to her house and that he was going nuts. Simpson could be heard yelling his head off throughout, while Brown pleaded with him to leave and pointed out that the kids were sleeping in an upstairs room. In the interview, Simpson claimed he simply did what any father would do. According to the Los Angeles Times, the 911 operator who took the call testified at the murder trial that she categorized the incident as life-threatening. However, Simpson was not arrested that night. According to O.J. Simpson, a friend, who he refers to as Charlie, told him that drug-involved shenanigans were going on at Nicole Brown's house.
I remember thinking, well, whatever's going on over there's got to stop.
Simpson said that hypothetically he parked in the alley in his infamous white Bronco, put on a cap and gloves, and had Charlie hold on to a knife that he kept in his car. He then hypothetically entered through the back gate, and soon thereafter Goldman appeared, and a verbal confrontation ensued. Brown joined them, and Simpson hypothetically confronted her about what Goldman was doing there.
As things got heated, I just remember Nicole fell and hurt herself.
According to Simpson's account, Goldman allegedly entered a martial arts stance, which the football player hypothetically didn't take kindly to. After taking the knife from Charlie, Simpson claimed that he didn't remember what happened next. Only after he came to his senses did he hypothetically notice that there was blood everywhere. During the interview, Simpson even broke out laughing while discussing how much blood there was.
Blood and stuff around. I hate to say this, but this is hypothetical. I'm sorry.
In his hypothetical scenario, O.J. Simpson claimed he blacked out during the commission of the actual murders themselves. When pressed on this point, after accurately describing the crime scene, he backtracked slightly by invoking the power of his imagination.
I don't think any two people could be murdered the way they were without everybody being covered in blood.
Simpson elaborated while referring back to the images taken at the crime scene, saying, "And of course, I think we've all seen the grisly pictures after. So yeah, I think everything was covered in blood. Would have been covered in blood." Asked if he ever blacked out before, he replied,
I would imagine it's something that you would probably automatically have trouble wrapping your mind around it.
If his account were purely hypothetical, the blackout might be considered a strangely specific detail to include. Also, if Simpson were speaking purely hypothetically, his phrasing would likely remain very consistent throughout, as he would presumably want to be clear that he was not recalling actual memories. As a result, Simpson's wavering regarding the alleged blackout might cause some to be suspicious.
To be honest, I know that to be true, yes.
Throughout the Fox interview, O.J. Simpson is very delicate with his phrasing, but at some of the most critical moments, his phrasing slips into a straight first-person account. In the first of these instances, he simply says that he doesn't recall when he's asked if the back gate to Brown's property was broken or unlocked, allowing him to gain entry. But as his account progresses, it becomes harder and harder for any reasonable viewer to believe that Simpson is describing something hypothetical that didn't actually happen.
It's hard for me to describe it, I'm telling you.
For example, in Simpson's supposedly fictional account, Ron Goldman told him that he was there to return some glasses. Regan asked if he believed this, and Simpson explained that whether or not he believed Goldman's reasoning was immaterial at that point. When describing how Brown came out and told him to leave, he revealed that he hadn't liked her demeanor and became more combative. Describing the escalation of the altercation, Simpson said,
I do remember that portion, taking a knife from Charlie, and to be honest, after that, I don't remember.
Regan also directed him to a passage in his book in which he claimed he removed one of his gloves before taking the knife from Charlie. Straining to think about the moment in question, Simpson replied,
I had no conscious memory of doing that, but obviously I must have because they found the glove there.
Finally, at the conclusion of his story comes the most chilling portion of the entire interview. With what appeared to be utmost sincerity, he looked into Regan's eyes and said of the murder's aftermath,
"It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible."
At the interview's end, O.J. Simpson lamented that there was a rush to judgment by the police and the media. He claimed that his reputation as a nice guy had been tarnished and that in only 4 days, any goodwill the public had once felt for him had completely evaporated. Hammering home his own victimhood, Simpson said that although Brown and Goldman had died, their deaths had killed his reputation, to the point where he felt as though he'd been murdered.
To this day, it bugs me that it seems that people wanted me to be guilty. That really bothers me.
This sentiment is understandably difficult to reconcile with the very existence of the interview and book. But Simpson seemingly couldn't help but indulge in some retroactive image rehabilitation. During the low-speed chase that preceded his arrest, he claimed that the majority of onlookers appeared to be on his side, saying,
"I was being depicted as a fugitive on the radio, but from the side of the roads, it was more people cheering."
Whether or not you believe Simpson's hypothetical confession, his insistence on being portrayed as the victim in the scenario is pretty chilling. If you or anyone you know is dealing with domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also find more information, resources, and support at their website.
O.J. Simpson went from one of America's most beloved football stars in the 70s to a suspected murderer by the mid-90s. In June 1994, Simpson's ex-wife Nicole Brown and her friend Ron Goldman were found stabbed to death outside the steps of her Brentwood condo. The case infatuated America, and the criminal trial later became known as the trial of the century. His acquittal in 1995, led by his dream team of lawyers, divided American opinions.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
People were split on whether he actually killed his ex-wife and Goldman in a fit of rage, or if he was completely innocent. While he walked free from the criminal case against him, a court did find him liable for the murders in the civil case. Simpson later wrote a controversial book titled If I Did It, which was foiled by the Goldman family, who were awarded the rights and filled the book with their perspective. Since then, however, no other suspects have been considered. There are some who believe that things are not entirely as they seem.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
There are those who believe that not only did he not commit the murders, but that Simpson knows someone close to him who did, and it's someone extremely close. In 2016, FX Network debuted their show about the case, The People vs. O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story. The true crime anthology show renewed American interest in the case, along with some forgotten theories. The two-time divorced Simpson was married to Nicole from 1985 to 1992, and they had 2 children, Sydney and Justin. His previous marriage was to Marguerite Simpson from 1967 to 1979. Simpson and Marguerite had 3 children, Arnell, Jason, and Aaron. In a devastating loss, a young Aaron drowned in the family pool in 1979, leaving the couple with just 2. And one of them is at the heart of a fringe theory that points to him as the killer. The theory claims that Simpson's oldest son Jason killed Nicole and Ron, and it became popular when author William Deere wrote a book titled O.J. is Innocent and I Can Prove It. The text presented several reasons which suggest Jason was the killer, citing his mental health issues, his past offenses, his affinity for knives, and a lack of an alibi on the day of the murder. However, no evidence has been presented to definitively prove the theory. How exactly did Jason Simpson become the target of this theory? In his book, William Deere asserts several claims about Jason that most people did not know of during the trial. He highlighted that Jason allegedly used drugs and alcohol frequently. Deere also says that there were multiple red flag-raising incidents that were ignored prior to the murders, such as when Jason, who worked as a prep chef, allegedly pulled a knife on his boss and almost killed 2 of his ex-girlfriends. He supposedly had a volatile temper and had also suddenly stopped taking his prescription medication. According to Deere's book, Jason even had an apparent liking for Nicole, one that led Nicole into believing that she was being stalked by him, and not O.J. as she initially believed. On the night that Nicole and Ron were murdered, Nicole had made a reservation at the restaurant Jason worked at, only she didn't show up, and Jason had reportedly left work early. His alibi afterward is not exactly airtight. To top it off, his DNA was purportedly never compared to blood and fingerprints at the scene of the crime. This seemingly leaves a major question mark in the case according to Deere. Deere also posits that Jason was unable to live up to his father's legacy, which had a detrimental effect on him. But Deere repeatedly points to Jason's mental health issues as a possible reason for him being the perfect suspect, along with the belief that Simpson would have taken the fall for his son out of guilt for not being there for him when he was young. Jason has since been out of the spotlight, and per a 2016 Los Angeles Times report, he was working as a chef at an Atlanta restaurant. Did you know that during his recent stay in prison, O.J. Simpson was able to play fantasy football, watch TV, and eat all kinds of junk food? Here's what else you didn't know about Simpson's time in jail. The reality of what prison looks like from the inside is oftentimes quite disturbing. Given what some prisoners report, the environment can be bleak and horrific. However, that's not always the case. Some inmates may look back on their time in the pen almost like they would a vacation. We all know about O.J. Simpson. In 1995, the former football star was charged with the murders of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman and acquitted on both accounts.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
However, Simpson was later sentenced to 33 years in prison after being charged with an entirely different crime that delivered a guilty verdict this time around. In 2008, he was convicted of armed robbery, kidnapping, assault, conspiracy, and burglary for robbing 2 sports memorabilia dealers at gunpoint in a Vegas hotel room. Following his conviction, O.J. Simpson was sent to Lovelock Correctional Center in Nevada. Lovelock was built in 1995 as a mixed custody state prison for men. Today, it can house up to 1,680 inmates who can pursue a GED, high school diploma, vocational training, or college degree while behind bars. One of its initiatives, the Structured Living Program, began as a military-influenced orientation and now combines education with physical fitness and job opportunities. It does not exactly sound glamorous, but former Lovelock guard Jeffrey Felix described the prison as a, quote, cruise ship with barbed wire, according to USA Today. Inmates enjoy access to sports fields, ping pong tables, exceptional food as far as prison goes, and cable television and movies. Felix reported, that prison is not like a normal prison. The food at Lovelock is very good. That prison is super duper clean. In 2013, Simpson told the parole board during his hearing, I feel lucky that I ended up here, and to some extent, as distasteful as the majority of the crimes are that's here, I find that there's no stress. I find that there's virtually no gang activity happening here. And honestly, I feel respected to some degree by most of the inmates here. The former NFL champ was reported by guards to have passed his days indulging in fantasy football, gorging on junk food, and relaxing in front of the 13-inch flat-screen television in his cell. He also had several jobs at the prison, from cleaning the gym to coaching and umpiring sports teams, a natural fit for the retired pro athlete who suffered from arthritis and injuries that kept him from playing the games himself. According to former Lovelock inmate Greg Lewis, Simpson coached his softball team to the championship 2 years in a row. Lewis said, he was super competitive, as you might imagine with OJ. He tried to get the rules bent for us. He knew the rules pretty well. He was a studious coach. OJ was not shy about bending the rules off the field as well, apparently. According to Felix, Simpson received special treatment from staff and other prisoners, skipping the line during meals, having his bags full of extra food carried back to his quarters for him, and being paired with bulkier, more intimidating cellmates who could act as bodyguards if need be. Yet O.J. Simpson hardly needed the bodyguards. He was both a respected and well-behaved prisoner, as he promised guards during his arrival at Lovelock.
He's a model inmate in there.
Simpson said during his 2013 parole hearing, I gave them my word that I would try to be or would be the best prisoner they've ever had here. And I think for the most part, I've kept my word on that. I've not had any incidents, despite all the stories in the tabloids and everything. I haven't had one incident since I've been here. Simpson also claimed he was a calming influence on the prison, telling the parole board, I'm sure the powers here know I advise a lot of guys. I'd like to feel I keep a lot of trouble from happening. After serving 9 years of his 33-year sentence, O.J. Simpson was granted parole and released from detention in 2017. In late 2021, at the age of 74, he was granted early release from parole and is now a completely free man, according to his attorney.
Nicole Brown Simpson kept a detailed diary during her marriage to O.J. Simpson, and the graphic descriptions of her alleged treatment at the hands of O.J. are not for the faint of heart. Although it's been almost 30 years since the trial of the century, people still talk about the case and debate if O.J. committed the murders. But whether the glove fit or not, one thing's for certain. There's no shortage of allegations that O.J. and Nicole's marriage was, at times, a nightmare. Just about every narrative surrounding the case tells the disturbing story of a beloved football icon and public figure being abusive toward his wife behind closed doors. And on October 5, 2020, the investigation discovery documentary O.J. and Nicole, An American Tragedy, explored these narratives for the 25th anniversary of Simpson's acquittal. The film featured Nicole Brown Simpson's many diary entries where she accused the running back of verbal, emotional, and especially physical abuse throughout the 15 years they were together, and even after they divorced in 1992. O.J. was still married to his first wife, Marguerite Whitley, when he met Nicole Brown, then an 18-year-old waitress at a Beverly Hills nightclub in 1977. For the Baltimore Sun, there were warning signs early on that Simpson was a controlling partner. Brown dropped out of community college soon after moving in with the NFL star because he, quote, required that she be with him. It wasn't long before Simpson allegedly began to show an even darker side to his personality. Brown's first diary entry from 1978 detailed how Simpson beat her after they attended an event in New York City. It began, "First time he beat me up. Started on the street corner of New York City, 5th Avenue at about 9. Threw me on the floor, hit me, kicked me." The entry, heartbreakingly read aloud in the documentary by Nicole's sister Tanya Brown, goes on to paint a horrifying picture of that night.
We went to the hotel where he continued to beat me for hours as I kept crawling for the door.
That was only the first entry. According to another undated entry from Nicole's diary, O.J. smashed her white Mercedes-Benz with a baseball bat after she arrived home later than expected. A similar scene is dramatized in the 1995 made-for-TV movie The O.J. Simpson Story, although some of the details were changed. Simpson's abusive behavior during their marriage included one instance in 1986 where he reportedly beat up Nicole right after they had some drinks. It isn't clear what caused O.J. to lash out, but Nicole added in her diary that the incident was so bad that she went to the hospital and told the doctor she'd been in a bicycle accident. About 2 years later, while Nicole was pregnant with Justin, Simpson drunkenly demanded that she leave their house, asking that she get an abortion and aiming a gun at her to show her how serious he was. Later, in 1988, Simpson supposedly became enraged after a gay man kissed Justin, who was then only a few months old. She wrote that he gave her bruises and she was terrified that he was going to throw her out of their hotel window. After a turbulent 7-year marriage, Nicole filed for divorce in 1992, though she did write a letter to O.J. soon after, longing for the happier times in their marriage and expressing a desire that the two of them get back together for the sake of their children. Being that she and O.J. Simpson were divorced, Nicole dated other men in the interim. But this didn't sit well with Simpson, who on October 25, 1993, supposedly screamed insults at her in a jealous rage while she was calling 911.
Just stay on the line. I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the shit out of me.
In a diary entry written around May 1994, Nicole lamented how hard it was for her and Simpson to come up with a proper visitation schedule with their kids. She wrote, "We've officially split. I've told O.J. we're going back to every other weekend. I need the rest. O.J. has gone so much. He needs the alone time with them till he leaves again. He's been gone the last 4 weekends, so I've asked if we can start with him this weekend." Nicole and Ron Goldman were murdered about 1 month after she wrote that entry. If you or someone you know is dealing with domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also find more information, resources, and support at their website.
Nicole Brown Simpson died steps away from her Los Angeles condo. And while the bloodstains on the sidewalk are gone, the Brentwood home's dark past remains. Just after midnight on June 13, 1994, Nicole's dog led neighbors to the bloody bodies of Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman. Someone had brutally stabbed them to death and slashed her throat.
Just did you do it?
No, I didn't. Nope. Did not do it.
A little over a year after a jury acquitted the late O.J. Simpson, Nicole's ex-husband, the condo finally sold.
Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
After some landscaping and an address change to try to obscure its history, the home again sold in 2006, per the Los Angeles Times. Kim Cooper, a true crime historian, told the Times in 2016, "If a crime is notorious enough, there is a very real danger that the structure will be demolished or altered to preserve the property value and deter sightseers." The condo, located on Bundy Drive in Los Angeles, is a 3,400-foot, 8-room structure with 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and a 2-car garage.
This is Nicole's house.
Nicole bought it in January 1994 for $652,000. Not long after the murders, her family put the home up for sale. Speaking to ABC News in 2006, Denise Brown said that after the murders, her sister's home had an empty, lonely feeling. "You know, something was missing, and it was my sister." The condo sat in the market for 2.5 years and finally sold in December 1996, not long before a civil trial jury found O.J. Simpson responsible for the deaths of his ex-wife and Ron Goldman. The family had the help of economist and appraiser Randall Bell, an expert in helping to sell infamous properties. Even so, the condo sold for less than Nicole had paid for it. The next owner, an unnamed Los Angeles lawyer, got the place for $595,000. A decade after the murders, the condo got a new owner, who paid $1.7 million for the infamous property, according to TMZ. The home, which had been drawing tourists since the murders, saw an explosion of rubberneckers in 2016 after the FX show People vs. O.J. Simpson: American Crime Story aired.
Detective Lang, you took evidence from a crime scene, you drove it home, and didn't book it until the next day.
Yes. Neighbors complained to TMZ that there was a significant increase in foot and vehicle traffic on the street as the series ran. The home reportedly continues to be a mecca for true crime buffs, as does the site of O.J. Simpson's former mansion, also in Brentwood, even though it no longer exists. The new property owners tore down O.J. Simpson's mansion back in 1998, replacing it with a new home, massive hedges, and signs warning of a guard dog, according to the New York Times. But the former condo of Nicole Brown Simpson, where she tragically lost her life, still stands.
You know the man, you've seen the trial, and you've heard that shocking verdict. But what do you know about the secret lives of O.J. Simpson's children? Trial of the century, dream team, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The catchphrases of the O.J. Simpson trial have long since displaced the substance of the case itself in the public consciousness. Add to that comedians' quips, throwaway references, and parody after parody, and the whole thing can seem like little more than a spectacle of pop culture.
We got a white Bronco heading east into the forest, requesting backup.
It's time for the men in steel to teach these madcap mammals their devil-may-mare attitudes just won't fly.
But behind all that, there is still the fact that Simpson's ex-wife Nicole Brown, a woman who had endured a long history of domestic abuse, was brutally murdered. And according to Marcia Clark, the lead prosecutor of the case, the bid for justice on her behalf was complicated by both Simpson's celebrity and a volatile period in Los Angeles history. By the time of their divorce in 1992, Brown and Simpson had been married 7 years, and they had 2 children together, a boy and a girl. Simpson put the children into the custody of Brown's parents after her death and his arrest, with the understanding that he could move to regain guardianship upon release. His effort to do so created another protracted legal battle, as even after his petition was granted in 1996, Brown's parents continued to seek permanent custody. Those children are grown now, as are Simpson's 3 children by a previous marriage. All have kept out of the intense spotlight trained on their father and family, but the continued fascination with Simpson hasn't allowed them to entirely escape notice. The oldest of O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown's children, Sydney Brooke Simpson, was born in 1985. In her childhood, she and her brother got an early taste of the limelight when their parents brought them to the premiere of Naked Gun 33 1/3. A more grisly kind of publicity came years later when paparazzi caught footage of the children attending their mother's funeral with their father. Publicity is something Sydney has sought to avoid since growing up. Aside from a 2005 arrest, she made no headlines and did her best to keep up her anonymity. A report by the now-defunct website Georgia Newsday found that Sydney frequently moved as an adult and went by the name Portia as of 2014. By 2016, she was reportedly living in St. Petersburg, Florida, along with her brother. Around that time, she was involved in real estate. The younger of O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown's children, Justin Ryan Simpson, was born in 1988, and he had the same early exposure to the media as his sister. In 2014, Georgia Newsday reported that he worked as a busboy in the same restaurant as his sister and half-brother, Jason. But by 2016, his business had shifted to real estate. It's a line of work he's evidently found satisfying, as he has remained a realtor ever since. Initially an agent for Coldwell Banker, he was working for DHM Real Estate by 2019. His Facebook, Instagram, and X pages are all named or otherwise connected to his business. However, his Instagram is more of a personal account, though none have been updated since 2022, when he and his partner announced they were expecting a child. Justin told the Tampa Bay Times in 2016 that while his career demanded long hours, he loved living in Florida. He said, "It's gorgeous here." Sydney and Justin Simpson's low-key lifestyles haven't entirely kept them out of media gossip, however. Their father has continued to endure ongoing public controversies, including his arrest and conviction for armed robbery in 2008, not to mention retrospective documentaries and dramatizations of his trial for the murder of Nicole Brown. Both have fueled interest in what became of the couple's children and what their present-day relationship with O.J. Simpson might be like. In the report, Georgia Newsday mentioned an alleged fight between Sydney and Simpson, during which Sydney is supposed to have accused him of killing her mother. Elsewhere, tabloids have shared various unverifiable claims. The National Enquirer pointed to unnamed sources claiming Sydney was sure of her father's guilt, but forgave him and sought to make peace with him during his incarceration. In 2019, Radar Online quoted her ex-boyfriend as saying that Sydney and Justin believed their mother was killed in a spoiled drug deal. Such claims remain nothing more than rumors, however. Radar Online quoted their aunt Tanya Brown as saying the now-grown children are leading happy and normal lives. She reportedly claimed they probably discuss the issue with each other, but don't discuss it with the rest of the family. Brown said, "It's the pink elephant in the room that I hope never shows up. We don't talk about it." Simpson himself told AP that he still has a positive relationship with his children and insisted that they don't discuss their mother's fate. The trial of O.J. Simpson ended with arguably the most infamous acquittal of all time, but if you weren't in the thick of it while it was going on, why that happened might not be totally clear. Here's a rundown of the different factors at play. The late Orenthal James Simpson, commonly known as O.J. or the Juice, was an American football star, broadcaster, and actor. However, he is perhaps best known for the trial and his subsequent acquittal of murder charges for the deaths of his former wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman. It may never be known whether Simpson, who died on April 10, 2024, was really involved in the events that took place almost 30 years earlier on June 12, 1994. At the time, many people were convinced of Simpson's guilt and were stunned when he was acquitted.
By now, the news is well known, but many questions remain. How did the jury decide that O.J. Simpson was not guilty on all counts?
In the decades following the announcement of the verdict, several explanations have been proposed as to why he was acquitted. At the time, however, the trial's jurors, many of whom were interviewed after, gave pretty simple explanations. For example, juror Brenda Moran said, in plain English, the glove didn't fit. She also said the prosecution's focus on accusations that Simpson had abused his former wife was a waste of time. Another juror, David A. Aldana, said the evidence presented against Simpson just didn't add up, and so he was confident in his decision to find the defendant not guilty. Meanwhile, Lionel Cryer said he and other jurors felt that there had been too many opportunities for contamination of evidence. In Cryer's opinion, the evidence presented was, quote, garbage in, garbage out. It has since been suggested that the jury's acquittal of Simpson was racially motivated, as Simpson, as well as 9 of the jurors, were black. However, Columbia Law School professor Patricia Williams argues the verdict had nothing to do with race. In Professor Williams' opinion, the jurors made their decision based solely on the evidence presented at trial. Williams says the prosecution simply did not meet the burden of proof. University of Virginia law professor Alex Johnson further disputes claims that race was a factor in the jury's verdict. As Simpson was a wealthy celebrity, Johnson said he had essentially distanced himself from a large portion of the black community. Therefore, Johnson says it is unlikely that the jurors felt any affinity toward Simpson in that regard. Others have blamed the media's coverage of the case for influencing the behavior of the participants and possibly influencing members of the jury. Lori Levinson, who teaches criminal law at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, said that Judge Lance Ito's decision to allow the entire trial to be televised essentially turned the case into a reality TV show. Professor Patricia Williams, meanwhile, claimed that the live coverage turned the focus away from the facts of the case. The prosecution has also received much of the blame for Simpson's acquittal, as they failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The collected evidence included a single glove found at the crime scene and a glove found outside O.J. Simpson's home, which contained a trace of Ron Goldman's DNA. In addition, drops of Nicole Brown Simpson's, Goldman's, and O.J.'s blood were found inside Simpson's Bronco. A sock with drops of O.J.'s and Nicole's blood was also found inside Simpson's bedroom. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that the blood and DNA evidence were simply not enough to secure a conviction. Detective Mark Furman found the bloody glove outside Simpson's home, which appeared to be similar to the glove found at the scene of Nicole Brown and Goldman's murders. However, while testifying, it was revealed that Furman had made a number of racist remarks in the past and had physically assaulted several suspects throughout his career. This revelation ultimately diminished Furman's reliability as a witness and as a police officer at the scene. It also brought an important piece of evidence into question. When Simpson tried the glove on in open court and it appeared that it did not fit, it only created more reasonable doubt. Simpson's defense team introduced more reasonable doubt when they presented witnesses who testified that much of the evidence had been either overlooked or mishandled. In particular, law enforcement made a number of mistakes while collecting evidence, which could have led to contamination. Other evidence was lost or even destroyed. All in all, it seems likely that the trial's media coverage, mistakes made by the prosecution, and police ineptitude may have been enough to secure O.J.'s acquittal. Sadly, whether he committed the crime or not, we may never know what really happened on that fateful night. From managing entertainers to saving over 300 prisoners from death row, the disheveled Barry Scheck is still making strides in the legal realm even after O.J. Simpson. Barry Scheck was born to an impoverished Jewish family in Queens, New York. In his youth, he worked his way up to a career as a manager for entertainers. With a start in entertainment, he later switched gears into a different passion of his, social justice and civil rights activism. At the time, he was also engrossed in social justice issues and became involved in the anti-war and civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s. In his teens, he attended Yale University to study economic history and city planning, thereafter pursuing law at Berkeley in California. As a legal scholar, he taught at the School of Law at Yeshiva University. In 1985, his career took shape when he defended a man named Marion Coakley, who was convicted of rape and robbery. Through fingerprint and blood evidence, Scheck proved that Coakley was not guilty of the crimes he was accused of. Research on the case led Scheck to a preoccupation with DNA and forensics, and in 1992 he co-founded the Innocence Project. The project is a nonprofit that advocates for DNA evidence to exonerate the accused and convicted.
Quite a number of our cases were people that were death eligible, or they would have been death penalty cases, but they were in non-death penalty states.
At its start, the nonprofit resulted in the exoneration of dozens of wrongly convicted individuals. Since then, the project has freed over 300 prisoners, according to NSB Civil Rights. Barry Scheck's reputation in the legal world led to his inclusion on O.J. Simpson's defense team, where he worked alongside Robert Shapiro and F. Lee Bailey. The infamous case revolved around the murders of Simpson's ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman. The two were found stabbed to death outside their Los Angeles home on June 12, 1994. The moment Simpson pleaded not guilty, a media extravaganza ensued, with Scheck as a volatile force in the midst of it all. The New York native stood out among Simpson's dream team for his more disheveled appearance, strong accent, and aggressive questioning style. White Americans largely believed in O.J. Simpson's guilt, while African Americans saw his acquittal as a victory over a racially biased legal system. Scheck's expertise in the forensic application of DNA research was brought to the public eye when he cross-examined LAPD criminologist Dennis Fung. He helped the defense's case provide evidence that a vial of blood was tampered with in order to frame Simpson by pointing to a window of time where the vial was unaccounted for at the crime scene. Today, Scheck teaches law and is still active with the Innocence Project. In March 2021, he spoke before the United States House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. In his testimony, he encouraged Congress to adopt pretrial methods for reducing wrongful convictions. Scheck was also honored in a speech by San Antonio Spurs head coach Greg Popovich in July 2022 at Rock Nation, pertaining to Scheck's work with the Innocence Project. At the summit, Scheck was given an award for his work in social justice. Barry Scheck serves on the board at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law. He divides his time between that school and being a commissioner on New York's Forensic Science Review Board, a regulatory firm that develops standards for forensic laboratories located in New York State. According to his law firm's website, NSB, Scheck was also president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers between 2004 and 2005. This is an organization that includes private criminal defense lawyers, public defenders, law professors, and judges that advocate for improving the criminal legal system. Scheck has also dabbled in television a few times to further his cause. In 2010 and 2013, he also played himself on 2 episodes of The Good Wife. In 2020, he appeared in several episodes of The Innocence Files, where he has also worked behind the camera as an executive consultant. The show was a miniseries documentary that highlighted cases of wrongful conviction handled by the Innocence Project and other similar organizations.